Hey, what's up? This is Jake. You're in Jake's shop. Time for another update on the Camaro. This time I'm going to be focusing on this LS1. I know I've talked a lot about the LS1 that I'll be putting into this car, and here it is. This is a junkyard LS1. Came out of a car with less than 20,000 miles, and it's been stored in someone's garage that I bought it off of, that he's had in there for at least 5 or 6 years. So I've actually checked it. I took the heads off. I've been checking everything, and it just has no miles on it. I did want a little bit of beef in this thing, so I went ahead and called Brian Tooley Racing. They make a bunch of different cams and cam kits, packages that they put together. This is a comp cam grind of their own that they recommend for a stage 2 kit. That should give me, another 50 plus horse at least to the wheels, and also the sound I'm looking for. I'm almost looking for sound more than anything. These engines stock are running around 380 some odd horse or more. Just out of the box. So this is going to be a powerful little engine. It's going to be really lightweight. I've got Brian Tooley's stuff in my car, and they're just really, it's good quality stuff. I haven't heard bad things about them, and they were really easy to deal with on the phone. Pricing's right, so I really can't complain about them. So I'll go ahead and do some time lapse of me putting this thing together. By the end of the video, it should look a lot different. Alright, got that cam installed, went ahead and made the bolts are torqued properly. Just kind of prepping for the gasket now. The oil pump doesn't need to come off, which is nice. If you were really trying to put a degree wheel on something like this, you definitely you'd have to pull all that apart and really mess with it. You'd have to get a different gear as well. But for this application and just a minor horsepower upgrade, it's not really needed. This isn't some crazy technical race application. I went ahead and inspected the old cam that came out. I just really wanted to take a look at those cam lobes to make sure there didn't look like there was any weird wear or anything going on. And just more proof that this engine had very, very low miles on it. Next I'll be going ahead and putting together the rest of this package. I'll do a little more time lapse of putting it back together. Okay, went ahead and flipped the block over. I cleaned the front timing chain cover and went ahead and bolted it on. The next step I really need to do is change this pan out. This is an LS1 conversion for my 68, which means one major component is the oil pan. It's going to interfere with the cross member, at least the stock oil pan on these stock F-body LSs. So I did went ahead and pick up a GM Performance Parts LS conversion oil pan. So I'm going to go ahead and bolt that on next. It's a really beautiful piece. I'm going to paint this block Chevrolet orange. I'm probably going to paint the oil pan. We'll see, but I want to get it as clean as possible, so I'm going to go ahead and do the components that are needed for that next. We'll shoot a little time lapse and see what it starts looking like.
Okay, so went ahead and masked it off and painted the block. You know, I didn't bother time-lapsing it, but I went ahead and go ahead and show what it looks like now. I did go ahead and mask off the oil pan. You know, I think it's going to look pretty good. Painted the harmonic balancer, cleaned up the oil, or excuse me, the water pump, and I'm going to go ahead and start assembling. I'll get some time-lapse me putting the head back together, putting the heads back on, bolting everything back down with new gaskets. Okay, so I went ahead and got the heads bolted on. You know, like I said, I'm just using a GM head bolt for now. Jegs actually does make a decent priced one, but for now I just went with these. There's a torque sequence that you have to be really mindful of whenever you're torquing these down. That's almost more important, sorry for the camera, that's almost more important than the torque itself. I mean, obviously the torque itself, but see, this is the torque sequence. I just wrote it down. 1, 2, you know, you start from the center of the head and you work your way out, and that's on the main bolts on this side and in here, and then the upper bolts you do last. They're a lot smaller on an ls1. I don't think it's till like an 04 ls or something. I think they're all the same size. So yeah, I went ahead and did that. You know, the other thing is when the gaskets, you know, I've got a really nice multi-layer metal gaskets on these. These are Felpros. You know, they're really easy to just, you know, it says right on there, the front. Make sure everything's really clean, both on the head side and on the block side before you go putting any of that down. And yeah, just torque them to specifications. You know, there's a first pass and a second pass that most times people recommend there. So next, I'm actually going to go ahead and do the rest of the cam kit install. So as you earlier in the video, I put that stage 2 cam in there from Brian Tooley. This is the original right here. Is the original Beehive springs, and these are the multi-layer springs that are in them now, or dual rate I should say. So the springs themselves are actually a pretty nice piece, but you can see there's a spring and a spring here, right? So you know, anytime you're going to upgrade the cam, you know, the springs are important. You don't want those valves to float and potentially hit the top of the cylinder. I've done that before, and it's not a fun day when that happens. Valves bend, heads can warp, bad things happen. So, you know, it's not too expensive, and it's actually not that too hard to do. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in and show you exactly what I'm doing here. Brian Tooley's kit here, stage 2 cam kit, came with brand new locating retainers, the top hats, the valve locks, with the spring set and the seals. So I'll go ahead and show you what tool I use to throw those in, and I'll do a set. I'll try and zoom up real close and show you what that looks like. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do another set here and kind of show you what I did. I'm hoping that the sound will be okay and you're going to be able to see this, but you're really just going to be able to see my hands here. So the tricky part of putting these new, you know, these are the new springs and these are ones I have yet to do. Couple things that make this a lot easier. One is getting air into this cylinder. And when you put air into the cylinder, that holds, because right now the springs and everything in these locks are holding the valves up. So I need to put air in the cylinder, and that'll kind of help keep the valves tight while I'm compressing these springs down and torquing everything. So what I did is I actually, so cheap, I just converted my compression tester, there we go, and took the gauge off and converted it with a little valve and an end so I could just constantly keep pressure on the cylinder. So going ahead and put this in there, and you know, it's just a spark plug with an O-ring basically with an end on it is what this is. And this will allow me to keep, you know, pressure in the cylinder and hopefully keep the valves shut for the most part. You know, if they fall down, it's kind of a bitch. You can actually reach in there with a magnet sometimes and get them up out of the way, or with a screwdriver really carefully, trying not to scar the inside of the cylinder. So I'm not going to hook up the air just yet. because I'm hoping that it doesn't mess up the sound here. But you know, everything is cleanliness here. I'm constantly wiping everything down. So I have an old trick flow, just little clamp assembly, right? So this bolts onto where your rockers are in, and then this clamp pushes those springs down. So I'll go ahead and get these on first. And you know, this could be done in the car, it could be done off the bench. This works both ways. I don't remember what this cost me when I bought it. I want to say it was like 30, 40 bucks. I don't know. Anyways, kind of a must if you're going to be changing valve springs out. You know, I used to be afraid of this sort of thing, and after doing it a few times, it's just not that big of a deal. There's a couple other little tricks through this process that make it easier. So now that's bolted down. You know, it doesn't have to be super snug. I mean, you know, just a little bit tight, it'll be fine. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over here, and you go ahead and, well, I'm not going to clamp that down yet. See, if I clamp this down, there's a possibility that those valves will want to drop down inside that cylinder. So I'm going to go ahead and hook up air, and hopefully it won't distort the sound too much through this process, because there's a little leak. Okay, so you hear the air kind of whistling by. You know, the valves aren't going to be perfectly seated because this engine's been sitting around a while. You know, as heat and everything starts going through there. Also, I have a little bit of a leak in my air hose. So anyways, that should keep the valves in place for the most part. It is kind of key when you're doing this. Like I said, I've done it in the past where I've, you know, turned the engine until it's a top dead, you know, till that piston's up, and then the valves can't fall down as far, but this just makes it a lot easier. So this plate is just going to push down on those valves around the springs, and you'll see these locks become present all of a sudden. Now, once they start coming loose, you don't want to drop those little locks down inside there because those things are teeny and they're easy to lose. So, little magnet, and you can see I'm just going to pop them right off of there. There's one. I'm just so, I could put the clamp down farther, but I'm so paranoid of these little things falling down inside there, I just don't really want to go pressing my luck too much. So, okay, now the spring locks are off. Now that's all that's holding the top of these springs on the top of those valves. You know, there's a little wedge in the top of the valve. So I'll get those out of my way. And now, once I relieve pressure off of this, that spring will pop right off of there. And I'm going to go ahead and get it all the way out of the way without dropping. Okay, good. That wasn't too bad. Okay, so now there's your beehive spring. It goes bye-bye. This is the top for that. And there's the other one. That's the top for that. So get those out of my way. Now, the stuff that Brian Tooley gave you and in the instructions there, it's actually a two-piece system. There's the lower locator and then the seal. On a stock LS, it's all one piece. So I'm not worried about reusing these, and the only thing I really want to do is loosen them up a little bit, and I don't want to scar the valve. So you can see this lower locator and the seal is all one piece. Now when we go to put the new stuff on, you'll see that it's not. So I'll bust these off of here real quick. And there's a little bit of oil in there, that's great. Oil sits inside there, kind of keeps everything lubed up. So now I'll get the lower retainers from Brian Tooley here in their kit. And you can tell the difference because they're flat on one side and they've got that concave on the other. So that just goes right down in there. And you know, they're a little bit oiled up and there's a little bit of oil in there. So hopefully my compressor isn't too loud. But I got to keep the air on this thing. Alright, so those are those. Now next are the seals themselves. Now, like the old ones, that was a one piece. These are two. There's a bottom ring, which mimics this part, and then there's the top seal, which is mimicking that part. So these are not. These are just the seal only. The trick is getting them down on there, on the shaft here. And I don't know the technical terminology because I'm a hack. But you can see the seal's separate. So what I like to do, what I did before, is I get a little bit of oil in there. A little bit of oil in there, right? And just kind of lube the valve a little. Luckily I've got a little oil down in here, so that's fine. And that'll kind of just allow it to slide down on the valve. You don't want to push too hard, because if you can push past that air pressure, that valve can go down. But see, then this slides right down. This one kind of does the same thing. Now the tricky part is those seals aren't all the way down. You can kind of push them, but it's a bear. They probably make a tool for this, but I don't have it. So very, very carefully, I will push right on the side of these. I don't want to get in here to the valve, but I'll just kind of push those down, and I'll actually end up using 2 screwdrivers for this, just to kind of wedge it, just make sure that seal's down all the way. And the way I check it is I'll take a measurement of how far from the seal to the top of the valve things are. So this is probably the ghettoest part of what I'm doing here, because you definitely don't want to damage this thing. And once it goes, it kind of just goes, and you'll feel it kind of fall down. Believe it or not, I'm not pushing very hard here. I'm really not trying to damage the seal. And I'm not trying to damage the top of the valve either. There we go. There we go. You know, probably heating them up a little, not too hot, would be enough. Okay. So those are all the way down. Now we're ready for some pretty cool looking springs. So I've got my 2 springs here. You know, these don't really matter which side. They're both identical on either side, so it doesn't matter. But what I like to do is push it down a little bit, just so it's kind of semi-flush to the bottom, one side. Because when you'll see that the top hat keeper goes on here, it'll kind of lock it into position. So I'll just kind of make sure both of those, and I like to face them up. And then you'll see the keepers for the top. I don't know if these are locators, maybe, is what they call these. Or retainers. I don't know. So anyways, you can see these are the tops. They're not flat on one side, right? It's concave on that side to accept the radius of the rings on the valve spring. Okay, so now those are set. A lot of oil on this stuff right now, so it's okay. So now we got to get my clamp back, and I got to find my bolts for my clamp that ran around the shop here real quick for me. Okay, so now we've got the base plate, right? It's going to fit right over the top of that. Now, like I said, the most difficult part of most of this installation, besides getting those little seals on, is this part. And I'll show you why. Now, when you compress this down, one thing I've noticed with this tool at least, you kind of just want to make sure that the tops of the valves are clearing the valve stems themselves. And you'll see them pop straight up through here. And then I'll show you what I like to do to kind of get those new retainers on, or the spring locks, or the valve locks in place. Okay, now the springs are nice and down, valve locks. So those are little teeny pieces. Now these are a pain. What I like to do is use a little bit of white lithium grease. This is just some basic white lithium grease. And I use it kind of like a glue. It kind of helps keep the valve lock in place while you're pulling the pressure back off of it, because if those don't lock down, then you know they're just teeny. And they're obviously they're concaved at an angle, and you can see the groove inside there that kind of locks it in the top. So I just like to run a little bit in there, kind of use the grease as kind of like a glue, and then wedge it down. I don't have it low enough. Use that. There we go. See, kind of glues it in place. Because the last thing you want to do is lose these suckers down inside the engine block. That's the nice thing about doing this off the car. And I'll probably do the other head while it's off the car just to make it a little easier, but I got a little anxious and wanted to see this thing together, so I went ahead and bolted this one. Okay, valve locks are in place. Okay, now just back it off. Kind of watch them as it's coming up. Just take it, you know, I kind of try and do it as best I can. Maybe put a little counter rotation on the angle. Okay, done. So that is how those go in. Not too bad, really. You know, it looks a lot harder than it really is in real life. It's just really repetitive. And you know, you just need to be careful. You don't drop stuff down in the engine when your head's bolted on. So yeah, there you go. After this, I'm probably just going to get the rest of these heads on, do both sides, and next is the rockers, right? So the rockers are, you know, this set also came with brand new chromoly push rods. You know, I put a little grease in here. I put some oil and some grease down inside the push rod when I go put it down in the lifter. And then these get torqued to 18 foot-pounds, right? And there's actually a griddle on the LS that holds it. So, okay, so got all those brand new springs and retainers and everything in place. Went ahead and just did the rockers. You know, there's really not much to them. Just want to make sure they're torqued right. I didn't go rebuilding the rockers themselves. They do make some different kits for those. But the only other kind of the interesting thing is when you're putting the rockers on, you want to make sure the valves are both at their, well, the valves are both shut, of course, but on the push rod side, you want to make sure they're down. So what I do is I just turn the crank by hand and I just put my fingers on the push rods to make sure they're both down. And I'll figure out which sets are down and I'll torque those, and then I'll turn it until those are the other ones that were up can be torqued down. So it helps kind of retain a little less pressure, but you really just torque them. You know, you just torque them. I want to say it's 18 to 22 foot-pounds and you're done. So not too bad. Went ahead and put the exhaust manifolds on. I think they're going to work. So that's really the next step. I've got the trans adapters there for the ls1 conversion kit for a hot rod that I've put in there. So for the engine mounts, like I said in previous videos, the oil pan's all set. So I'm probably just going to throw the valve covers on it temporarily. My intake won't be here for another couple weeks, but I do want to test fit it now that I've pretty much got it together. Waiting for an intake and go ahead and kind of fit it into the car. Just make sure everything fits right. I went ahead and left the lower engine mounts slightly loose. That way when I'm fitting this thing in, it'll kind of be able to have a little bit of adjustment there. So probably ended the video with this one. So she's got all new cams. She's pretty much cleaned up and ready to go back into the car for some test fitting, and we'll go on to the next step. Hey, if you liked this video at all or thought it was fun to watch, go ahead and like and subscribe, and I'll keep doing videos and updates on the car. Thanks.